117 people vanished without a trace in 1590. No bones, no bodies, no screams, just an empty colonial settlement in what is now North Carolina, and a single word carved into a tree that would haunt American history for over 4 centuries. What really happened to the lost colony of Roanoke? In 1587, English colonist John White led 117 settlers to Roanoke Island. They arrived with supplies, weapons, and one powerful ambition: to establish England's first permanent foothold in the New World. White left his daughter Eleanor behind, his granddaughter Virginia, the first English child born in America. Then White did something that would change everything. He sailed back to England for supplies. He promised to return in 3 years. Took him 9. When White finally returned to Roanoke in 1590, the colony was gone. The wooden fortifications had been dismantled. The houses were empty. The crops had been consumed or abandoned. There were no signs of struggle, no blood on the walls, no graves freshly dug, just silence and the question that still echoes today: where did they go? This wasn't just a colonial failure. This was a complete erasure. And the mystery of Roanoke would become one of the most debated historical puzzles in American archaeology. When John White explored the abandoned settlement, he found one crucial piece of evidence. Carved into a tree, without the distress symbol that had been agreed upon beforehand, were 5 letters: Croatoan. This wasn't a random mark. Croton was the name of a nearby island and a Native American tribe. White interpreted this as a sign that his colonists had moved to live with the Croton people, perhaps voluntarily, perhaps by necessity. But here's where the story gets complicated. If the colonists had simply relocated, why destroy the fort? Why abandon the town completely? White believed his people survived. He believed they integrated with the Croatans. But other colonists and historians who came after him wondered if this carving was something darker. Could it have been left by someone under duress? Could it have been written by a captor, not a refuge? The word Croton became the Rosetta Stone of American mystery, interpreted and reinterpreted by scholars, each convinced they held the true answer. For centuries, the story of Roanoke has been told from the English perspective. But the Native Americans who lived on these lands had their own account. Documents from the time period, including accounts from Chief Powhatan himself, describe violent clashes between English colonists and indigenous peoples. The English had come not as peacekeepers, but as conquerors. They demanded corn. They stole resources. They brought disease. They shot at indigenous hunters. One colonial account describes an English raid where they burned Native American villages and fields. In return, the indigenous peoples fought back with the same intensity. Powhatan's brother Opechancanough led military campaigns against English settlements. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Roanoke colonists were caught in the middle of an escalating conflict between English ambition and Native American resistance. The Croton people themselves had every reason to see the English as invaders. So when the colonists disappeared, it wasn't necessarily a peaceful relocation. It may have been a calculated consequence of a conflict that was rapidly spiraling out of control. So what actually happened to the 117 colonists? Historians have proposed 3 main theories, and each one tells a different story. The first theory is assimilation. Perhaps the colonists, facing starvation and disease, negotiated with the Croton people. They would have been skilled in construction, metalwork, and agriculture. They had knowledge the indigenous peoples valued. Some colonists, possibly many, could have integrated into Croton society, married, had children, and their descendants lived on, their English heritage fading across generations. The second theory is capture and relocation. If the Crotons defeated the colonists in conflict, they might have enslaved them or incorporated them into their community by force. There are historical precedents for this. Some captives were killed. Others were absorbed. Archaeological sites in the region show material goods consistent with English origin, suggesting English people lived in these villages. The third theory is massacre. This is the darkest interpretation. Perhaps conflict escalated beyond negotiation. Perhaps the colonists were killed in a raid, their bodies buried or left in unmarked graves. The archaeological record doesn't show obvious mass graves. but that doesn't mean they don't exist. For 130 years of North Carolina, weather, forests, and development can hide a lot of evidence. The disappearance of Roanoke colony wasn't just a historical curiosity. It shaped the entire trajectory of English colonization in America. After Roanoke failed, investors grew hesitant. Colonization seemed impossible, dangerous, costly. It took 16 years before the next major English colony was established, Jamestown, Virginia, in 1607. And when Jamestown was founded, its settlers approached Native Americans with even greater hostility, armed with the knowledge that the Roanoke colony had failed, perhaps destroyed by the indigenous peoples. The distrust was mutual and destructive. If Roanoke had succeeded peacefully, if colonists and Native Americans had coexisted, the entire history of America might have been different. The failure of Roanoke, in many ways, set the pattern for centuries of conflict that would follow. The colonists had arrived with the expectation that they could take what they wanted from this land and its people. The indigenous peoples, in turn, defended their territory, their resources, their way of life. Neither side could coexist in peace. Roanoke became the blueprint for colonization through conquest, not cooperation. In recent decades, archaeology has brought us closer to the truth. Researchers using ground-penetrating radar have searched the Roanoke settlement for graves or mass burial sites. They found evidence of post-molds, where wooden structures once stood, but no definitive proof of what happened to the colonists. More intriguingly, DNA analysis has revealed something remarkable. Some Croton tribal members today carry English and European genetic markers. Their oral histories speak of ancestors who came from across the water. This doesn't prove that all the Roanoke colonists assimilated, but it does provide evidence that at least some did. In 2020, an archaeological team discovered pottery shards at a site near the settlement that matched English manufacturing techniques but showed signs of being used by people unfamiliar with European pottery. It suggested English colonists had survived and were living among Native Americans, using English-made goods in a hybrid way. Recent research has also uncovered colonial artifacts scattered across multiple indigenous sites in the region, suggesting that colonist material culture had spread far beyond Roanoke itself. These findings don't solve the mystery completely. They complicate it. Some colonists likely died. Some were likely captured. Some probably assimilated. Some may have tried to reach the Virginia settlement to the north and never made it. Over the centuries, wild theories have emerged. Some claimed Roanoke colonists reached Florida and founded new settlements there. Others believed they sailed to Europe or became pirates. A few even suggested they were abducted by UFOs. None of these theories hold up to scrutiny. What we can reasonably eliminate is that all 117 colonists were killed and buried in unmarked graves without a trace. Archaeology would have found some evidence by now. We can also reasonably eliminate that they all successfully escaped and reached England or the Spanish colonies. There's no documented record of a group of English colonists arriving anywhere with that story. The most plausible explanation, supported by evidence, is this: the Roanoke colonists experienced conflict with indigenous peoples in the region. Some were killed. Some were captured and held by the Croton or nearby tribes. Some negotiated peaceful integration. Some may have scattered, trying to find their way to other English settlements or back to England. The colony was never intended to be a hybrid space. It was built as a military outpost of England. But its failure forced a different reality. Assimilation, not conquest. The colonists learned, too late, that you cannot impose yourself on a land without compromise. And when compromise failed, they paid with their lives, their freedom, and ultimately their identity as English colonists. They became something else, something in between. And that's what makes Roanoke not just a mystery, but a tragedy with lessons that still matter today. The lost colony of Roanoke reminds us that history is rarely as simple as we want it to be. There are no clean answers when cultures collide. There are only people trying to survive, and the complicated truths that emerge from their struggles. If this changed how you think about American history, about colonization, about what it means when one group tries to dominate another, subscribe and hit the bell. Because the real story of America isn't in textbooks. It's in the questions we ask and the evidence we're willing to face. History Untold is here to help you see beyond the narratives you've been taught. Thanks for watching.